I was standing on the stage of my own charity ball when the spotlight changed the temperature of the light so abruptly, as if someone had decided to show the guests how much my face really weighed without the mask. The glasses fell silent, the string quartet froze in mid-measure, and the huge screen behind me flashed with documents I was never supposed to see, bills with my signature, remittances to offshore companies, internal letters with quotes that made me a thief even to myself. I felt my tie suddenly become tight, like someone else's finger at my throat, and the hall where I had been collecting applause for years turned into a sailboat abruptly breaking its mast. On the podium nearby, confident and almost affectionate, my longtime partner Marco pressed his phone to the microphone. The broadcast was live, millions of eyes slid over the lines, squeezing the meaning out of them like a lemon into a glass. "Is that true?" asked the woman in the front row, the same one I had paid for the child's surgery. Her voice trembled slightly, like crystal on a windowsill from a distant train. "Sit down," the assistant whispered to me, but my knees, obedient to meetings and numbers, suddenly lost the instruction on how to be feet in someone else's body. I leaned towards the microphone and heard my own breathing, blown up by the acoustics to the scale of a storm. "This is a fake," I said, and the sound of my voice seemed to me to be the voice of a strange man who played me better than I played myself. Marco smiled, the slight shadow under his eye, which I had known since my youth, strangely emphasized the tenderness of this treacherous gesture. "So tell me, why the signature?" He touched his finger to the line on the screen, and the line, magnified to the absurdity, looked like the crack line of the heart on a cardiogram. I remembered our first contract in a tiny office with a creaking desk and tea that smelled more expensive than today's champagne. We had promised each other that the numbers would serve the people, not the other way around. "We've calculated the risks," I said to the audience and to myself, and suddenly I felt that the word "we" no longer existed in my language. The security guards took a step, the cameras clicked like the teeth of a cold mechanism. "Stop the music," I ordered, although the music had long since stopped. For a second it was so quiet that I heard the phone vibrate in my pocket, a message from my sister: "You should know, he's not the only one." My fingers gripped the edge of the podium, the wood gave way and creaked like an old boat. I looked up and saw that for the first time in years the audience was looking at me not as a benefactor, not as an investor, but as a problem they wanted to solve without me. "Okay," I said, and there was enough salt in that okay to cover all my medals with. "Then let's get started." A week later, my house resembled a museum after a pogrom. Empty frames, torn documents, switched off phones, and I was alone in this silent chaos, like the shadow of a man who once ruled the world. The newspapers called me an empire of lies, my former friends suddenly stopped answering, and the lawyer who had once said that everything is under control simply disappeared. Marco appeared on television with the face of a saintly whistleblower, quoting excerpts from our letters, adding details that never existed. He knew how to lie with nobility, and that was what made him dangerous. One evening I stood by the large window in my office, staring at the neon prints of the city drowning in the rain, and asked myself where I had gone wrong. I was not making money for vanity, or so it seemed to me. I wanted stability, I wanted my family name to become a symbol of strength. But power is something that eventually begins to demand sacrifices. And I sacrificed everything: sleep, honesty, people. When the investigator called, his voice was too calm. "Mr. D," he said, "tomorrow we will search your office. You should be there." I could have escaped, withdrawn the rest of the money, but something in me broke completely that evening. I decided to stay. Because what is escape if there is nowhere to run to? You can't run from yourself. After the search, I went outside as the sun was setting behind the skyscrapers, and for the first time in years the air smelled like real air conditioning, not cigars, but rain and dust. People walked by without recognizing me, and there was something almost liberating about that. But just when I thought I had lost everything, a letter arrived. An ordinary envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph, me, Marco, and another person I didn't immediately recognize, our old accountant, dead for 5 years. On the back was the date, 2 days before his suicide. And a brief note: he knew. I sat down on a bench in the rain, holding this scrap of paper that smelled of dust and mystery. And for the first time in years, I was scared, not for my business, not for my reputation, but for the truth. Because I suddenly realized that everything I thought was a betrayal might be just part of something much darker. And if the accountant knew, then maybe others did too. I was being used not as a criminal, but as a cover. When I got home, the police were already waiting at the door. "You're being called in for questioning," the officer said. I looked him in the eye and just nodded. But something else was already sounding in my head: someone is playing chess with me. And I don't even know whose move was first. The interrogation lasted for over 6 hours, and every minute felt like a blow to the part of me that still tried to believe in logic. They asked questions not to find out the truth, but to break the rhythm of my breathing, to wrestle emotion, to make me doubt my own memories. I looked at my watch and noticed how time slowly rotted away between the ticks of the second hand. When they released me, I felt no relief, only a strange fatigue that reminded me of the end of a long illness. The night was empty, like the bell after an explosion. I was walking through the old quarter when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You're looking in the wrong place," the woman said, and I turned sharply. Under the light of the lantern stood Leah, a former investigative journalist with whom I had once ruined other people's careers with the truth, until we realized that truth was also currency. She had disappeared a few years ago, after publishing an article about our accountant's disappearance. She looked different now, quiet, confident, with eyes that didn't seek approval. "He didn't kill himself," she said, not looking at me. "And what you saw at the ball was part of the operation. Marco wasn't alone." "Are you sure?" "I have the records. The names. But they're too expensive. And if you want to see them, you'll have to pay with something other than money." I was silent. Her words sounded like a confession and a sentence at the same time. She handed me the flash drive. "That's just a piece of it. I won't trust even myself with the rest. But start here, you'll see that this whole scandal was prepared long before your mistake. You're just a convenient nail on which they hung their sin." When I inserted the flash drive into my laptop, the screen lit up with a map of transactions, the names of ministers, intermediaries, shell companies. My name was repeated dozens of times, not as the culprit, but as a key player through whom money was being drained to government structures. I sat watching my own life unfold in reverse, and for the first time in many years I felt not fear, but an unbearable clarity. "They need you, because only you could have signed those documents," Leah continued. "And now either you break this scheme, or it will bury you forever." "And what will happen to you?" I asked. She smiled, sadly, almost tenderly. "I've already made my choice. You haven't yet." She disappeared into the darkness as quietly as she had appeared. And I was left with the flash drive in my hand, a small fragment of truth that could either save me or destroy me. And somewhere inside, for the first time, it wasn't fear that arose, but anger. Because now I knew, my collapse was just someone's business plan. I was sitting in the car in front of the building where I had signed my first contract with Mark. Once this office had been a symbol of our friendship, the beginning of a great cause, faith in ideals that had later turned into smoke. Now it seemed to me a crypt for all illusions. Inside, behind the dark glass walls, a light was on, and I knew he was there. I saw his silhouette, that confident gait that I had once envied him. I had no weapon, only a flash drive in my pocket and the truth that burned inside me worse than fire. When I went inside, the guard immediately raised his hand, but Mark, seeing me, only stopped him with a gesture. "You look tired," he said, pouring himself a whiskey. "Maybe you realized that the struggle is useless?" "You don't even try to hide it," I answered. "After everything." "Hide?" He laughed, slowly, confidently, as if I were his partner again, not his enemy. "The world belongs to those who are willing to get their hands dirty. You just forgot how to do it." I threw the flash drive on the table. It clicked like a sentence. "That's your end," I said. "You, the ministry, all your fake accounts." I could have hit send right now, and you would have been wiped off the map. Marco just smiled. "And then what? You will become a hero? Will people believe the one who lost everything? Who signed the documents himself, without looking?" His words hurt because they were true. I really used to close my eyes to things I didn't want to see. Because it was convenient. Because it seemed to me that the main thing was the result. And now the result was looking at me through Marco's eyes. "I am not a hero," I said quietly. But you are not a god. And today, even if I fall, I will drag you with me." He took a step closer, set the glass on the table, and a faint crack appeared in his gaze. "You wouldn't dare. You have too little left to risk." "That's why," I replied, "I can finally do it." I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, pressed a button, and sent the entire file to journalists, to the prosecutor's office, to international investigators. The room went quiet, so quiet that I could hear the ice in his glass melting and falling to the bottom. "You ruined yourself," he whispered. "No," I replied, "I'm just no longer afraid." I left the building, leaving behind a world where lies had golden buttons in shop windows. And when the cold air touched my face, I realized that for the first time in many years I was breathing real oxygen, not with filters, not with illusions, but pure, sharp, alive. But somewhere inside I felt, this was not the end. Because the truth that I had let out into the world now had a life of its own and could return, like a knife with a memory. 3 months passed. My name still flashed in the headlines, but now not as a symbol of corruption, but as a paradox, the man who destroyed his own empire to expose the system. Some called me a class traitor, some a hero, but to me I remained only a fragment of my former self, who had finally learned to be silent and listen to the world without the noise of money. I lived on the outskirts of the city, in an old house with wooden windows that creaked every morning, reminding me that life is not silence, but movement. One morning I received a letter. No signature, no stamps, just a white envelope placed in the mail slot. Inside was a newspaper clipping, Marco R. found dead in his own office. The police suspect suicide. I sat with this paper in my hands for a long time, feeling neither triumph nor regret. Just a deep, almost biblical weariness. The world had come full circle again, and everyone got theirs. But no one's own looked like a victory. In the evening I went out into the yard. The wind was shaking the branches, a dog was barking somewhere in the distance, and it seemed to me that everything around was saying a single phrase: "You paid, but you learned." I remembered Leah. She no longer wrote, although I knew that she lived somewhere under a different name. Her truth also had a price, and we both paid in our own way. I looked at the slowly darkening sky and thought about how strangely the world worked. We strive to own it until we realize that it never belonged to us. All these years I have been building an empire, believing that wealth gives freedom. But freedom is when you are not afraid to lose. As the sun sank below the horizon, I lit a candle in the window. Its flame flickered, a reminder that even in the midst of darkness, someone could see the light if they looked not with their eyes but with their conscience. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe I would be summoned to court again, maybe I would be forgotten forever. But for the first time, it didn't matter. I went back inside, stopped in front of the mirror, and saw the man I had been looking for so long, not a businessman, not a philanthropist, not a fugitive. Just a man who had survived his own lies and had learned to speak the truth even when no one was listening. And then I realized that true wealth is not bills, not real estate, or power. It is the ability to sleep peacefully when the world no longer applauds. Because sometimes, to find the truth, you have to lose everything that hid it.